call were taken on the Iowa Prairie in the early 1900s, 12,623 rural country school students would have answered. Grundy County had 117 schools, according to a 1905 map. In 1858, the Iowa rural school system was established under the Common School legislation. The very first school in Grundy County was located 2 miles east of Grundy Center and dates to 1850. In 1858, the statewide Iowa rural system was adopted. The planners determined that a school should be established every 4 square mile, which was consistent with supporters of common schools, who advocated that no child should walk more than 2 miles to school each day. Townships usually had 36 sections, with each section approximately a square mile. There were 9 schools planned for each township. If a township established an independent town school, it would replace one of the planned rural schools. From the beginning, non-rural educators living in cities tended to dismiss the value or importance of Iowa's rural school system. They had little understanding of how the size of the expansive prairie, rural transportation issues involving bad roads, large families on the farm, and weather conditions each contributed to the need for rural schools. Nor did they understand the important role of children on the farm. The size of families who arrived to the prairie were large. 6 to 10 children in a family was not unusual. Not only did these children assist with the farming and household chores, they influenced the need for rural schools. One such early settler was Ben Van Diest, whose parents had immigrated to America from Ostfriesland, Germany in 1874 because of poverty, social instability, lack of freedom of religion, and cheap, fertile farm ground available in the Midwest. Berend, Ben, was married to Harmke Saethoff in Illinois and moved to Grundy County to raise their 10 children, 2 of whom were Adolph and William. At least 4 of Adolph's children and 6 of William's children attended Palermo No. 4 school. To some, it became known as the Van Diest School. Another family attending rural schools in Grundy County was the Lynn and Hazel Doak family. Lynn's great-grandfather came to the U.S. from Ireland in 1769. Lynn's father, John Perry, bought the Melrose farmland in 1897. All 6 of their children attended Melrose No. 6. Small towns that were dependent on farming did not develop until there were enough farmers to support them. In the beginning, trips by farmers to get essential supplies from railroad stops were often long and treacherous due to weather and bad roads. Only when farmers increased production above their families' needs did many small towns develop and grow. Exchanging goods and services created interdependence between small towns and farmers. With the change from horses to tractors by the 1940s, farmers increased production using less manpower. The history books will show that Herbert Quick influenced many beyond Grundy Center as one of Iowa's great writers. His signature book is Vandemark's Folly. Its pages are filled with stories of the prairie and school days at Colfax No. 9 in Grundy County. His work and the school are the cornerstone for Grundy Center's only tourist attraction, which was highlighted on Iowa maps beginning in 1941. Quick wrote in his autobiography,
"The summer before I was 16, I heard that our county superintendent of schools would hold at Grundy Center a new sort of school called a Teacher's Institute. There was nothing traditionally in our society for a boy who was so good a scholar, but to become a teacher. And thus I suddenly found myself out in the great world, the transition from the life in Colfax Township to the little village of Grundy Center, the plunge into the classes meeting for lectures in that old wood schoolhouse, was the most astounding leap of my whole life. It was a new world."
Herbert Quick Schoolhouse, originally situated in Colfax Township, was moved to Orion Park in Grundy Center in 1933 as a tribute to Herbert Quick, by now a well-known Iowa author. In 2016 through 18, the school underwent restoration, including a new foundation, floor joists, siding repair, and painting. A new entrance and bell tower complete with school bell and a handicap-accessible ramp were added in 2018. Although the new addition is not historically authentic for a Generation 1 rural schoolhouse in Iowa, it is designed to create a visual concept and experience of rural schools in the state in general. The original Colfax No. 9 applied for listing on the National Register of Historic Places in 1941, but was denied because the school had been removed from its original rural location to the town's park. We must remember that students lived within 2 miles of each country school. There were a variety of ways they arrived.
We were a quarter mile from school, so either my dad would take me if it was bad weather, but when it was nice, we would ride our bikes.
Oh, there was various ways. In the winter, of course, they would drive you, and of course, they would pick you up. I remember my very first earlier years. I wasn't just a tyke. I must have been in first grade. Irvin had the cart. It was a 2-wheel cart, and I and Pink were in the back, and Irvin and Mildred were in the front, and he took a pony over, and they'd tie the pony up in the back of the courtyard where the school was. There was a place, and then horse would eat grass and feed it water and so forth, and take the ride home. So I think the first year or two, I had the experience of riding in the cart, and of course that was fun, and it wasn't hard work because you didn't have to walk.
Well, I think my parents took me when we were little, but when we got older, we rode our bikes. And I know one time in the spring, after the snow thawed, we had the mud road, gravel road turned into a mud road and could not get through. So my dad still had his horses from when he farmed. He couldn't get rid of them. They were pets. So we had a horse and a wagon, and he hooked it up and took us in the ditch. We stopped by and picked up the Myers kids. And I was telling my kids about that years later, and they laughed. They said, "Oh, Mom went to school in a horse and buggy." And I said, "No, it wasn't a horse and a buggy. It was a horse and a wagon."
School didn't usually start till after Labor Day. I remember riding in a 40 Chevy to school. I think it was usually our dad that took us.
No matter how students arrived, every school had pretty much the same daily ritual. It began with chores to open the school.
I guess carrying water. They always had 2 of them that would take a bucket up to the closest neighbor and fill it with water, so because we didn't have any running water. They'd always pick somebody that was strong enough and they could do that. Come back and they'd put it in the shelf in the coat room and put a dipper in it, and we all drank out of the same dipper.
2 kids, an older and a younger kid, walked across the street with a water bucket and pumped water out of the farmer's pump to bring back to put in the water cooler. That was one of the first things that got done so that people had water for the day.
We had a milk can, a tall silver milk can with a lid, and it was usually the bigger boys that would go across the road to the Driesman house, to their well, and fill it and bring it in our little room that we had. I think we called it the washroom. And we had 2 basins, and we didn't have 2 basins to start with, but we girls were complaining that the boys' water was always so dirty, that they were more dirty than the girls' hands were more dirty than the girls. So we insisted we have 2 basins. We wanted a his and a hers. So we got 2 of the wash basins, and they would bring the water, fill the 2 wash basins, and then fill our water dispenser, which was a crock with a spigot on it. And in that room, we had shelf for our dinner buckets. We had our name, and we had to keep it in place, and hooks that had a hand towel and a tin cup. And every Friday night, you would have to take those home and wash them and bring them back on Monday morning all clean, and then they'd be good for the next week. I think my dad made my cup. It was a tin cup like, you see at thrift stores and antique places now. Of course, they were antiques that far back, but with the little handle and then the hook.
The students' clothing was simple. Girls' dresses were often homemade, sewn from colorful feed sacks or cotton goods.
I wore dresses to school. In the winter, then you would wear slacks underneath your dress.
Without a doubt, teachers had the greatest single impact on their students' happiness, educational accomplishments, and even their future success. They were the first extension of family in their somewhat isolated rural life, and students' memories reflect this.
Yes, as editor-in-chief of Successful Farming, I get to meet some really astounding people in agriculture around the world. And one that really intrigued me and interested me most was a statistician. He had worldwide recognition. Through some circumstances in his state, which was Tennessee, he was given permission to analyze all of the school records of the students in the state of Tennessee over multi-year periods. And using his statistical methodology, he looked at all the factors that can influence success for student learning and progress, and found in every type of district, from rich ones to poor ones to those that students that come from poor conditions to those that would seem to have everything in the way of resources, that in the classroom, the only factor that stood out significantly with every single one of them was the teacher. And it comes to mind now in looking at our rural teachers and how former students give so much credit to the rural teachers they had in our country schools that of course, when you had a teacher that had a very close relationship with her students, very small classes of 3 or 4 or so, and a lot of personal time with them where they knew each other, that she could really do a lot for them in their learning process. And it's why I think our country schools were very successful. And so I do give a lot of credit to those teachers, because the students themselves speak so highly of them.
Sandy Loger Sims became a teacher because of her teacher, Ethel Schoolman.
And my favorite teacher. That's because of her, because I went into teaching.
Sandy tells us she would use her workbooks to play school at home. She was the teacher, and her students would sit on the stairs going up to the upstairs rooms. She loved playing school with her imaginary students. Elizabeth Eckhoff Osborne wrote, "I loved the way Mrs. Abels would read or tell stories. She made me feel like I was in the story. She patiently spent time encouraging as I learned to read. Mrs. Abels made me realize that just because I was left-handed or nearsighted, I did not have any excuse to not do the best I could in anything I tried. She was strict, and everyone who was taught by her learned very quickly to do it correctly because Mrs. Abels said so."
I'm Dr. Troyce Fisher, and I am a niece of Alice Reuter, the person about whom we'll be speaking today. I have some history in Grundy County because I was raised between Ackley and Wellsburg and also went to a one-room school, and my mother was also a one-room school teacher.
Miss Reuter wrote, "Graduating in 1930, I wanted to be a teacher. I took 10 weeks of training at Ellsworth College in Iowa Falls in 1931. We had classes on Saturdays, so the training could be completed in 10 weeks.
Alice had a number of rules of ways she wanted to inspire her students. And she wrote in her scrapbook that has over 104 pages in it, of her recollections of having been a one-room schoolhouse teacher. She wrote on one of the pages, "The first rule I always wrote on the blackboard was the golden rule." But then she also posted some other gems, and she wrote those in the scrapbook as well. Things like, "God expects us to be good only a minute at a time. What am I doing now? Let us all do our best today. A good man dies when a boy goes wrong. Be clean. Ability plus opportunity means responsibility. I live to do good to others. We are too busy to kill time, and be cheerful." I think this scrapbook gives you some sense of the magnitude with which Alice considered her calling as a teacher. But what I was struck by so much in this scrapbook was not her recollection so much of the textbooks she uses or the pedagogical strategies she employed or anything like that. What was really important to her, and it makes sense in retrospect, was the fact that she spent a lot of time talking about the people who were kind enough to be that she would board with, that she would live with. And of course, those people had to be close to the one-room school where she taught. But there are all kinds of memories in here she has about what they cooked for her, or how they came to her rescue and got her to school on snowy days, or family situations. And one very poignant example was when she was staying with the family when she had an emergency certificate to teach when the war was in full force. And she said one of the sons of the family with which she was staying was called off to the army and then was subsequently killed. And I mean, they were like second family to her. And she wrote in one of the things that this family was my home away from home. And when you think about it, it must have been a fairly lonely existence because she had no other co-teachers. She had no other support system around her. So those families that took in these teachers for like $2.50 a week or something played a very big and important role in rural education in Grundy County. The one-room schoolhouse teacher actually shared a lot in common with teachers now and vice versa. I mean, a good teacher knows his or her subject matter thoroughly, is able to inspire students with a variety of instructional strategies, knows how to have a good relationship with students first and foremost, is able to figure out multiple ways for a student to be successful so it's not just one and done, teaches life lessons, and is committed to his or her own learning. And that's true for any teacher. Always has been, always will be. The difference is, I think, when Alice was a teacher in Grundy County rural schools from 1932 to 1944, is that the emphasis there, of course, was on the 3 R's.
Alice went on to write, "The county superintendent's unexpected visit was one that I, as a teacher, dreaded. He would listen to the class session and view the school's register."
Yeah, the way that teachers were measured in terms of progress and in their own professional growth was fairly loose, I think. At least Alice didn't mention a lot about it. She did say that annually she would be surprised by a visit from the county superintendent, who would all of a sudden show up in the doorway and then observe her for a while. And she noted I had a sense of relief when he left, and he always had good, positive things to say about me. I see that as the only kind of evaluation she had. I don't read any notation of the president of the township school board giving any feedback. She was a member of the Rural Teachers Association, and I can infer from that that was a professional association that helped each other out a bit. Annually, they had a county-wide in-service day, we would call it now, where teachers came in and they had a variety of speakers and a theme every year and so on. I think it was a pretty isolating profession at that time.
It was an occasion to celebrate for the students at Palermo No. 4 when a new school building was moved from the Shiloh district in October 1948. Everyone, including former teachers and pupils, was invited to attend an old-fashioned box social to celebrate. The adult members of the district presented a fun, rollicking program with an amusing old-fashioned school day skit. In closing, pupils were seated in a circle on the floor where they sang a group of songs accompanied on the violin by their teacher, Avis Smith. Gifts were presented to school directors, Melvin Collins, president, Harvey Mackey, and Willie Van Diest, who gave untiringly of their time and effort in getting the new schoolhouse ready for occupancy. High on the list of happy memories from country school days would be the Christmas program.
We always had a Christmas program, and everyone had to memorize. You could not hold a paper and read it. You had to memorize everything that you were supposed to do. And there would be group singing, and there would be individuals, and there would be poems that they would memorize, and usually somebody who liked to joke a little bit would have something that everybody could laugh at. And that's when all the parents came. No electricity, no water. We had holders on the wall where you could put a lantern up and light it. And the Christmas programs were always at night, so all of them were lit when they were there. And each of the parents brought food. So we would have like cake or something of that type. And we practiced many weeks for those programs. And my teacher, Helen, her dad was a carpenter, and he came out and stretched a wire from one wall across to the other, and then took curtains and they put clips on the curtains so that it could slide on that wire. So we had a regular curtain to open and close for each person that came. And so we would practice that so that sometimes they were afraid the younger ones would be scared when they'd have to go up by themselves. But everybody had a part in it.
In the old school, they had, I think it had the stage in it. I mean, it had.
It was already built.
I think it kind of had to raise one step up.
Yeah,
you know,
I think so.
Being back in there behind the curtains waiting to do your.
And somebody would go to,
Yeah, we would have an all-school picnic a lot of times. And I think, if I remember right, that usually was either at the end of the school year or at the beginning. And I remember we came to the Grundy Center Park, and it was just our school and parents.
The annual County Rural School Festival was held each May. Each school prepared a float for students and teachers to ride on in the grand parade. Sometimes as many as 2,000 people turned out to watch. The highlight of the festival was the crowning of the festival queen, who was chosen by the Board of Education from among teachers. The county festival ceased during World War II and was not restarted again. Students watched, listened, and learned from each other as the teacher called different grades to the front of the room to recite what they knew.
Well, the older ones would help the younger ones. I remember many times helping younger ones with reading. You know, we'd sit and listen to them. When somebody was called up to the front and you were having your lesson, whatever it was, reading or geography or whatever, the other kids, they were listening to. You know, you just couldn't help that. And so you'd learn.
Okay, sixth grade math come up. And so she would have, the sixth graders would come up, sit in, and sixth graders might be only 1, 2, or at the most 3 kids. I think 3 is the most we ever had in one grade. They'd come up and sit in their class, and they would have a class there. So they tried to keep the noise down or the level of conversation down, but they would discuss sixth grade math. Well, I'm in fifth grade, and I might be doing my math, and I'm hearing what the sixth graders are doing in math, and I'm interested in that, so I'm listening to that. So I'm actually hearing sixth grade math. I heard sixth grade math when I was in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, and by the time I got to sixth grade math, I'd heard it 4 different times. So
Learning was put into practice with the annual spelling bees and declamatory contests. And then there was the dreaded 8th grade exam, which qualified rural country students who passed it to enter high school.
We had to come up to the courthouse. There was tables in there, and it was all timed. Each one that you took was timed. And then you waited, and they would notify if you passed.
Well, I found my 8th grade exam grades, and we must not have had anything in music because I didn't do well in music. I got pretty good grades in some of the rest of them, but music was really bad. So apparently we didn't do that much.
And we had to take an 8th grade exam to get out of 8th grade to go on to high school.
when I was in 8th grade, that exam was given in the basement of the Farm Bureau building in Grundy Center. And so there were students from all the rural schools that were still open, as well as the students from the school in Holland.
Even as late as the early 1950s, life beyond the township was somewhat limited. There were chores on the farm, planting and harvest times, and social visits among neighbors. It was exciting when the students were able to explore new things and new places.
We would take little field trips, and there was a creek not too far away, and if it was science, she would take the whole school, and we'd walk down there and whatever she wanted to teach us. So that was fun.
The teacher had lined up a field trip to Waterloo Ooh, Waterloo, you know, I'd never been there. And most pretty near all our kids had never been to Waterloo. A lot of our parents hadn't even been to Waterloo. We went to the foundry, which is where they melted the steel, put it into melt steel, and then they'd pour it into these things and make different the crankshafts and things. And it was a long trip, and whew, it was exciting.
Families in each township were responsible for providing equipment in the schoolyard, and students eagerly looked forward to recess each morning and afternoon.
Recess was fun. And most of the time, well, not in the winter, of course, but we would play softball, and Ethel our teacher, she would be the pitcher, and she would just be pitcher for both teams, and we would choose sides, you know. And of course, then there's, you know, the swings and all that other kind of things, but most of the time it was a softball game.
Well, we played that Annie over, and I didn't remember exactly how it worked either, but I remember you could run as fast as you could because you didn't want to get hit with the ball.
When the ditch was full of snow, we'd go out and dig tunnels or dig things in the snow. You know, if the ditches were level full, then we could tunnel and make places for our igloo in the ditch, I guess.
Oh, we usually played ball or tag, or our schoolhouse was pretty high in the air for most people, but we'd try a ante over, you know, see if we could get it over. Sometimes older ones could, but the little ones never could.
During bad weather, students in schools that were fortunate enough to have basements often played games there, and accidents happened even inside.
And we were allowed to bring our roller skates at one time so we could skate down there. We drew up roads so that you could follow certain roads, and then you'd make a sharp turn off somewhere, so it would be a challenge. And my challenge didn't work that time on the going good. So I ended up with my ankle going clear to the floor, but it didn't take long for me to have a really bad sprained ankle. Then the skating was stopped for a while.
When discipline problems arose among students, they often occurred on the playground, and then recess was withheld as a discipline tool, or extra recesses were used as an incentive to encourage good behavior.
I don't ever remember anybody being really naughty in school, and if you did, you knew you were going. When you got home, you were going to be in worse trouble, probably.
In 1953, boundaries for the township schools were changed to put rural school districts within the new community school districts, and rural residents voted on which district they would join. 21 school districts voted on the proposed enlarged Grundy Center Community School District, and there were 19 votes in favor. By 1956, only 10 rural schools were open in Grundy County. 1961 saw the last rural schools closed, with only Holland Independent remaining open. It too closed in 1966, and its 65 students began riding Grundy Center school buses the following fall. And thus roll call on the Prairie ceased. The once bustling rural schoolhouses slowly vanished. The lure of the Prairie had given rural schools their beginning, but changes to agriculture, an increasingly mobile society, and urbanization of the state caused the school's decline. The memories of those who were educated in rural schools remain vivid today, and their stories are too important not to tell.
The old Prairie, which we feared, loved, and conquered, a thing of great beauty and wonder, maybe, long after we're dead and gone, someone will find it precious